Welcome to Read This Author's Corner. I am your host, Alice James, and I am so excited to have with me today co-author Riley, the author of This Here Flesh, the Harlem Book Fair's Wheatley Award winner for nonfiction, a New York Times best-selling author. Welcome, Cole. Welcome, Cole. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have this conversation. I have been enjoying your book, so
Well,
I can't wait for the audience to get to know the person that I've met inside the pages of your book. So, can you
mm,
tell us a little bit about yourself?
sure. Thanks for having me and trusting me in your space. I am Cole Arthur Riley. I'm a writer. I'm the author of a book called This Here Flesh and a forthcoming book called Black Liturgies, um, which was born out of a digital project that I created called Black Liturgies that connects themes of Black grief, Black emotion, the Black body, and Black literature with spiritual practice. And I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but currently live in a small lake town called Ithaca, New York, so a bit upstate. And I live in a very old home that was built in 1840. It's where I'm speaking to you from, and do a lot of work to kind of preserve it and keep it best we can.
I heard that in the book. I love old architecture and old
Mm.
homes and the history of things. So that was, I was like, oh, that's so cool. Yeah. You have a very poetic way of writing. Just your writing is poetry. Like almost everything has this very unique rhythm. I was, I don't even know what the word is, but I was so taken back by how you can flow from one story to the next, seemingly uninterrupted, but it could be two different stories. You could be talking about your grandmother, and then you could be talking about you and your husband, but the it's like this seamless transition from one thing to the other, but the rhythm takes you from one place to the next. It's almost like you've ever seen someone doing a record, and because the beat is the same, they go from one song to the next
Yeah.
song, and it's such a smooth transition. That's how
Mm.
you write.
Thank you.
Where does that come from? That's just so interesting.
Thank you. I have never heard anyone describe it like that. Um, yeah, I've always kind of well, I love poetry and I love writing poetry, and I think it would have been hard to write, this nonfiction book without some kind of like lyrical element. It would have been difficult just with the way that I've learned to write. So I did want it to feel a bit lyrical. I write while I listen to music, instrumental music, no words, but um I have this playlist and it's always the same, I don't know, like 7 or so songs on repeat. And I have wondered if that helps, like writing to some kind of grounding sound helps to kind of connect um sentences and kind of the cadence that you would read the sentences in. Um, yeah, but I'm glad that you felt that because I skip around a lot, and I was trying to play a lot with memory and the way memories don't come to you all together. They come to you in pieces and fragments, and I'm relieved to hear you say that the kind of lyricism didn't make that fragmentation feel, like, disruptive or disjointed. Yeah.
I actually was in awe by that. It's just like we're talking about this, now we're talking about this, but wow, when did we get here? It's,
Mhm.
but it's how it is truly how. our thoughts and our memories work. And
Mhm.
you do such a beautiful job of connecting the two through the cadence and the rhythm of your writing. So it constantly feels like it's just one continuous conversation, almost like as though you're having a conversation with yourself. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And I think that comes because I was writing out of conversations with my father and my grandma. I would, literally talk to them on a Friday or Saturday and then write the chapter on the Sunday, and I would ask them all of these questions, um, and so that conversational element was very, present to me when by the time I went to write. Yeah.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
Mhm. It's a two-part answer. So I had started the, project I mentioned called Black Liturgies, and out of that kind of exposure, I was approached by several publishers to write a book, and I thought it was going to be like the Black Liturgies book version of the book, which is um, doesn't really involve me. I don't really show my face in that project or talk about myself in that project. But simultaneously, I had begun this personal project of interviewing different elders in my family. Um, my husband, his family has just this rich well of memories and artifacts and diaries and journals and all of these things that, um, younger generations inherit. And I think I was feeling a little bit of jealousy, honestly, of what his family has been able to preserve, and thinking about my own kind of family location, there isn't much preserved. I mean, there's certainly not much in the form of physical artifacts, but even our stories, there are no diaries or journals or things like that. And much of our history, I think, has been, stolen from us in that way. Um, and so out of that jealousy, I began to think, what could what can be preserved of our family? Like, what can we do? And my family's very big on oral storytelling, and um, I began this kind of habit of taking this little kind of dinky video camera to people and interviewing people, either video recording or just audio. And my grandma and my father and I's stories in particular, there was so much, like, resonance and so much overlap, I think, in our stories, that by the time I went to write this book, which was just supposed to be kind of nonfiction, spiritual contemplation, but by the time I went to write it, I those stories were so awake in me that I couldn't write about dignity without writing about my father greasing our scalps in the morning, and I couldn't write about grief without writing about my grandma on the linoleum floor, and, I think I had to really become honest about what book needed to be first, if I was gonna survive as a creative, and thankfully, the publisher I landed with was, very generous and, readily accepting and whatever I was offering, so I was able to kind of shift the book in that way into what I call contemplative storytelling, so connecting stories with these questions of what it means to be human, what it means to be a spiritual human.
Stories about daughters and dads are, I may have shared, is something that I do like to expose my audience to. I actually was listening to a podcast, and there were several women on, and one woman said she has never read a book that had a father and daughter in a positive light.
Mm,
And that really struck a chord in me. So whenever I have the opportunity, I meet a daughter that has a daddy daughter relationship. I like to explore that. mind sharing?
Yeah, my father was a single teen father. He had my sister when he was 17 and me when he was 19, and um didn't have a partner that was helping him raise us. He raised us with the help of his mother, my grandma, who's also very present in the book, and some aunts and uncles, his siblings. It takes a village, but really, for a while there, it was us. It was my father and his 2 little girls, and, um, so we have a very close relationship because of kind of that season of only having him to look to. I think I definitely experience my father, even to this day, somewhat in, like, a heroic fashion, but as I've gotten older, I've started to kind of contend with the complexity of him is not all hero, he's certainly not a villain, but, yeah, I think as I've made sense of that, so in the book, I eventually talk about his addiction, um, but I wait a long time before I even mention it. There are no allusions to it, there's no foreshadowing, and that's very intentional because I wanted the reader to fall in love with my father the way that I love him and not reduce him to this singular story that I think Black men and women are often reduced to. Um, so I wait to share that, but I do share it in the end because I think it's an important part about of seeing our parents as human and, not our saviors, but kind of real and complex humans that had lives and thoughts and traumas before they had us, or before we knew they did. And yeah, I'm still quite close to him today, and, um, I feel very grateful to have a father who is so both like me and unlike me. A lot of people assume I come from a family of readers, a family of kind of intellectuals. My father is the first to admit, like, he probably hasn't picked up a book in a decade. Um, but he saw something in me and knew his little shy daughter, was going to need a way to communicate with the world, to exist in the world. And so he was the person who introduced me to writing. Even though he's nothing of a writer himself, he would have us write in our journal every day. He didn't read it. It didn't matter what we wrote, just as long as we were writing. And once he realized that I was quite shy and having a lot of speech delays, I had something called selective mutism. He began kind of paying us, he would, like, bribe us to write stories and poems to get out of chores or for money at times. It's like you could, dust the baseboards or write me a poem about on this word, and I think that's such a creative and subversive way to parent and to have that intuition as a father, as a man, I think is really beautiful and not often celebrated.
Would totally agree with that. Because I tell people I'm a daddy's girl, not to the bone, but straight to the marrow, to the marrow. And a couple of years ago, I wanted to interview some fathers that I knew had good relationships with their daughters. And I reached out to several different men to say, can you talk to me about being a girl dad? Do you know pretty much all of them turned me down because they didn't see themselves as kind of perfect enough. They shared with me all of their shortcomings and all the things that they did wrong and how they didn't feel like they could speak on it because they had made mistakes. And I think if there's any place where there's a double standard, that I would have to say it is in how we expect, especially our Black fathers, to be like perfect. can't have any humanity, you can't have any complexity, or you are not a good father. So I always like to be able to show that there are good fathers out there, and there are daughters that love and respect their father with their complexities. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. You share a lot. You get into some of your health issues. You get into uh, the challenges that your grandma had as a child and even as a grown woman. When you were putting those things together to put them out there, is there something that you wanted the reader to get from that conversation? Is there a feeling or thought?
If anything, I think a kind of desire, kind of momentum toward the reader examining their own stories and their stories in the context of this intergenerational, um, kind of shared story. I think we have to be the keepers of our own memory in a world that does not always honor Black stories, and in societies that are really committed to their own historic amnesia. I think the best one of the best things we can do for ourselves is become our own historians and our own family historians. And I hope that, any reader of this book leaves closer to that desire, the desire to remember well and in the context of and in an intergenerational context.
That touches me in a place because I have a regret and I try really, really hard not to live in regret. Um, my father passed at 95. He passed in 2018.
Mm,
And he always told stories. And up until maybe about even 4 to 6 months before he passed, he was in pretty much good health, high spirits, just a
mhm,
fun person. And I had all these stories that I had heard for years and years, and I thought I knew them like the back of my hand. It was, you could not have told me that they would ever fade out of my
mhm.
memory.
Yeah.
So now we're like 5 years since he's passed, and I'm starting to feel like the stories are fading.
Mm,
And there's a part of me that is like, you want to hold on. It's almost like these feathers that just started to blow away in the wind,
mhm,
and you're now I find myself trying to grab a hold to what was that story, or trying to work really hard to keep sharing the stories so they could stay fresh within me.
mhm,
So that is very important, and um, I'm glad you shared that because I believe that is something that the audience could take take away and actually have an actionable item to
mhm,
how do I preserve my family stories, and how do we tell our stories from this point of a participant in the story. Well, I was recently talking to another author, and one of her pet peeves is that a lot of our stories get told from the observer's standpoint.
mm,
And what you observe and what you feel are two different things.
mhm,
So, the fact that that is something that you want the audience to get out of the story is absolutely amazing, and I thank you for that. So, is there something else that um, you would like to share with the audience? That is there something that you want to pull from the book and say, you know what, if you take away nothing else from this book, I want you to be able to take this from this book.
To think of, the first line that comes to mind is a line that my grandma spoke actually, and it was added to the text very late. I mean, way past the point where I should have been permitted to add anything. But thankfully the publisher let me. But as this here flesh was in production, my grandma was hospitalized and eventually passed away a few months before the book was released. But in one of my visits with her at the hospital, she said, she was talking she was a bit out of it. She had been in a coma for a few days and had woken up in a medically induced coma, and, she was a bit out of it, but she was talking about herself and me and kind of mixing up the pronouns, so I didn't know who she was talking about when, but in a very beautiful, unintentionally beautiful way, and in the end, she just looked at me and said, "We took the sweetest part of the fruit and we cut it off." And I remember getting chills all over my body. She said it a few times, "We took the sweetest part of the fruit and we cut it off." And I left the hospital room, and I remember being in the hospital, like, Googling to see, "Is this a quote? Did she just come up with that out of her mind?" And I'm like, that was just who she was, a poet through and through. But what she was saying is, you know, our family has been, like many families, has been dealt so much trauma, and, she in particular has seen the terrors of the world in a way that many don't. Um, but she always had this fidelity to living, this fidelity to kind of sustaining herself and her family, and uh, even in the midst of being dealt something that feels entirely inedible, and entirely unsurvivable, and what felt like unsurvivable times, she found a way to survive. We took the sweetest part of the fruit and we cut it off, and, we did what we could to preserve the good and to preserve the beauty. And I added that because I knew, I was sharing a lot of traumas, my family's traumas in the book. And I know how easily, we can be reduced to our pain. And I wanted to communicate that, just as we inherit the traumas of our families, we also inherit the resistance and we inherit the beauty. Um, yeah, and if there's any line in the book that I would want someone to kind of carry with them, I think it would be that.
That's a beautiful line. I mean, it really is a beautiful line. And it does really speak to the resilience and um, when you're able to have this fruit that is rotten to the core and you find this one little spot here that's, ooh, this is really sweet and it's still good, you know, and you're able to throw away all the rest of it and just
Mhm.
keep that. And yeah, when I listen to your father's story and your grandmother's story and even your health challenges, and
It's
I
very
was
true.
so encouraged by your book. I was so inspired by the stories, as challenging as they were. You told them in such a way that you showed the light in the darkness.
Mm,
You showed the good part of the fruit
mm.
as you weaved your story through, and you did a beautiful job of weaving your story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Um, no, I don't think so. Just thank you again for inviting me into conversation and for, yeah, letting me in your space. Yeah,
Oh,
grateful
well,
for it.
thank you. Thank you for being willing to come and share. One of the things that I also loved when I was reading your writing is you believe something that I believe. Spirituality is action in the now.
Mhm.
It is making where we are a better place. It is being useful here in the present. And there was so much that you said around not just pushing it off into the hereafter. I love that about your writing is that not just your writing, but your philosophy, I should say. I would
Mhm.
love that about your philosophy that spirituality is not just about the hereafter, but it is about the here and now. And
Mhm.
I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that resonated. Yeah.
Yes, you did. I enjoyed your book and I've enjoyed talking to you. And hopefully, I can have you back on to talk about your next project because
I would love
I'm
that.
sure it'll be as awesome as this one is.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love that. Let's do this
Okay,
again.
excellent. Wonderful talking to you and
Yes.
be blessed. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today with Cole author Riley, This Here Flesh. Please pick up a copy of her book. It's touching, it's moving, it's poetic. Until next time, this is Read This, and I am your host, Alice Maria James, and it's been wonderful sharing with you.